which may in fact be part of the problem. And so I don't want to see us, unless you guys think it's a good idea, to use the rationale if we need to have more modern technology, we need this new thing in the education system, so let's set up a big program and hire some more people who probably will know better than we've done with 3 or 4 other major national pushes in this area. Could you comment on that? I mean, we want to be helpful, the federal government, but we do have some clear problems in education, and whether doing it top-down beyond the bully pulpit is really constructive or not is something I'd like to
I understand future in this town means 2 years, but it's going to take a little bit. So a short-term kind of thing that might help would be something like the following. The successful widespread of powerful ideas in some school districts I've seen. For instance, the Pasadena School District has one of the best elementary science programs. It was done by a couple of scientists at Caltech kind of in their spare time, and it got bigger and bigger and better and more organized, and it's in the whole school district for the last 5 or 6 years, and it's really excellent. And they had to do it without being able to turn any of the elementary school teachers into scientists. But what they did is and this is, you'll find, I think if you go around the country, you'll find very similar structures in other successful areas. What they did was they came up with a combination of what the elementary school teachers do in the classroom, combined with district circuit riders who were scientists, who really had a sense of this. And basically what they wanted to do was to have daily activities that were bolstered by 2-time-a-week visits by somebody who could assess the quality of what was going on. And I was involved in one of these with music that I put in one of my written documents, where the entire school district had to become musicians because it was a small high school and they wanted a full band and an orchestra and a chorus. And so they just taught everybody to be musicians regardless of talent, and the school teachers had the same admixture of talent as anybody else did, but they had an excellent music coordinator, and the whole thing worked very well. So and this used to be a popular way of doing things like art and music and science and so forth 40 and 50 years ago. Many states have cut the funding for those people, those curriculum experts who traveled around and helped the teachers. I think that would be something that would not cost a lot, that would make an enormous difference in the short term. I think in the longer term, you really have to think about restructuring the whole nature of school and what we think of as schooling in this country.
Well, I got one suggestion, and that is that you get somebody on your staff to really get involved with a lot of time in discussion about, on the long term, about how things, what real radical change might look like. There's not enough time to do it here. Alan Kay and I were talking before this meeting about creating a forum for this in cyberspace, if we can say that. And just as a start on my written testimony, there's an address on the web which I think we might be able to use as a starting point for that. So call in and get somebody in your staff to devote a serious amount of time to trying to get engaged in a discussion about how things might... What is that address again
for anyone who might be watching?
What's that?
It's right above the... you don't want us to say it to you because it's
right.
One of those
you all get
lines.
this, don't you? Yes.
Yeah, it's right above the recommendation, where it says recommendations.
Why don't we read it?
URL.http blah 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 blah. Once you give that,
you've got a staff who'll understand that.
If I just have a minute to add something to that, or do we have the time for that?
Sure, go ahead.
I think that's a wonderful idea. I think the idea of having a presence on the internet would be a terrific idea for many reasons, both for people involved with public policy, for teachers, and for students. And I think, as Professor Papert said, I think that that's something that's likely to be inexpensive, immensely valuable. I think that's a great idea. In terms of the longer-term funding issues, the last thing that I personally would like to see is a massive federal program where money is thrown at the problem without thinking of things that actually we have evidence will work. I actually think that the vast driving force here should be the private sector, both for the development of the underlying technologies, which are bound to happen in most cases anyway. There are other commercial drivers, and in the case of educational software. I think there are relatively limited areas, though, where there's tremendous opportunity for the federal government to leverage that. One of the main ones is in research, and in order to make sure that we don't have a top-down solution that generates worthless stuff, I think one of the best things to do would be to have a series of small, relatively low-funded, but a reasonably large number of investigator-initiated early-stage research projects so that the free market of ideas could help define which solutions actually take. I think in the long run, realistically, we're going to need some large-scale trials. It's very easy for scientists to fool themselves and think they have a result, especially when there's an emerging new paradigm that everybody believes in. And so we're going to need some of that. That will cost something, but we don't need to do all of that immediately. And I think in the long run, we really want to rely very heavily on the private sector, on volunteerism as well, and then leverage it very carefully with federal support.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Foley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to state that this is probably the best panel I've heard since I came to the 104th Congress. Honestly, because the key to the problems we face in our society are being answered by the panelists. The problems we face, the crime, the illiteracy, the abuse at home, can all be solved if we would take some of the great import we've had today. Professor Dede mentioned about parents dropping kids off as if it's laundry. That's happening in our schools today. They assume there's no responsibility after 8 o'clock. It's the teacher's problem. I talk to teachers in the school system. They describe themselves as babysitters, counselors, police officers. I mean, that's not educators. That's being guardians or custodians of problems of children. The exposure to technology we've talked about. If you go to a Head Start program and watch children, 2- and 3-year-old children playing with computers and working on stereo equipment, it's phenomenal. Their grasp of these technologies that my father, when I show him a new VCR, he says, how do you start it? What do you do? How do you set the time? Put a 4-year-old and the kid will dial it up because they've been exposed to something. Dr. Shaw, I had highlighted your comments on the percentage spent on discovering new $50 million for the Department of Education's $30 billion budget allocated to research. Clearly, we're not going anywhere because we're not spending the money in the right areas. Pratt Whitney, a company in my district, has 20 students from disadvantaged homes working in their plant on high-tech projects, learning, focusing on responsibility, and coming away with a knowledge and more than anything else, a responsibility that they have a daytime opportunity to show up at 8 o'clock and leave at 4 and get paid for it, but learn something about the high-tech world in which we live. The School of the Arts in Palm Beach County, teaching children much like those operating the C-SPAN cameras today, how to work in the technology of broadcasting, broadcast journalism, dancing, theater. I mean, these aren't traditional school programs, by and large, by academicians. But let me tell you, there's 0 incidents of crime in those schools against teachers, children, against property. They're doing something God gave them a talent to do. They're exploring the new world in which we live. Professor Papert mentioned things. Let's shake this place up. We are sitting in a time and place where teachers report to work, there's union rules, the students are told to sit down and shut up. You know, and our answer sometimes, well, if we take a minute to pray, then the society's going to get better. What we need to do is shake up the system. And we have got to push every button we can. And I'm glad Mr. Walker, Chairman Walker, brought the Education Committee together, because I think science is the fundamental reason. People say, Mark, you shouldn't spend money on the space station. That's our learning environment. That's our future. That's our nation's opportunity to get kids out of the gutter and into opportunities for their future. So all I can tell you is I am thrilled. I'm thrilled about all of these suggestions. But I pray that we don't just shut the lights off and go back to our jobs and say, well, that was nice. Because if we don't rock the foundation of education, we keep spending more and more money to do the same old thing. And I agree that one classroom concept. Why keep a kid in 2nd grade when they have an aptitude of a 5th grader? Put them together, and then they'll learn to be an 8th grader within the 6th grade. And pretty soon you now have students leading students. It shouldn't be the teacher standing up, follow me, do as I do and as I say. It should be the student saying, come explore with me this opportunity of education. I have so much hope and promise for this nation. But if we don't direct the resources to to research, to improving education, to making our kids able to focus outside the box that they're put in, then our society will stay static and our crime rates will increase and violence against women will continue because they don't know any better. And I'm just, I can't say enough about this panelist group because I think we should take verbatim their transcript and send it to every member of Congress, every principal in every school system in America and say, folks, wake up. When the bell rings, it doesn't mean act like a robot. It means act like a person that can instill in the children of our country the opportunity to learn. God bless you.
Come join our forum. Web's waiting there.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. What I'm going to do here is we have members that continue to come in and out of the room, and that extends the panel. I'm going to go to two people who have been here throughout the time that came in early and so on, and then dismiss this first panel. Mr. Weldon was here earlier. I'm going to go to him. I'm going to go to Mrs. Johnson, and then I'm going to shut it off for this panel and go on to the other one. So I recognize next Mr. Weldon and then Ms. Johnson. Oh. Okay, well, Mr. Baker was here as well. All right. Okay, well, Mr. Weldon first.
I thank the chairman. I have a lot of interest in some of the things you've all been talking about, particularly in regards to some of the things my colleague from Florida was just saying challenge the whole structure of education. I educate my 8-year-old daughter at home. I discovered many years ago that children in home education do actually quite well, and their social skills are actually superior. And that was actually one of the things that interested me in home education when I was in the Army. I got to be good friends with 2 officers who had children that they home educated, and I noticed that there were some peculiar things about their children. They didn't dress in a bizarre fashion. They didn't wear their hair in a strange way. And when you looked at them, they actually looked at you in the face, and if you said hello to them, they actually said hello back, and they didn't look up at the ceiling and walk away. And they were fairly well behaved and seemed to be well adjusted. And to me, just from my perspective, the whole concept of taking a bunch of 7th graders and sticking them all together and a bunch of 8th graders and sticking them all together may actually be a faulty concept. As I understand it, there are some research studies that have shown that students in those old-fashioned schools where they were all mixed in and all the grades actually academically do better. And do we really need to fundamentally rethink how we do education? I know for my wife and I, we're using a lot of high-tech stuff. We're using videos. We're using computers. Though I will say, I think it would be inappropriate for us to oversell this stuff. One of the things I've noticed with my daughter is she really loves those math programs when I sit down next to her when she's doing the math programs. And parental involvement, you know, they say in real estate, you know, it's location, location, location. I think in education, it's parental involvement, parental involvement, parental involvement. And we could talk about all the newfangled stuff, but if you don't have parental involvement, forget it. I mean, you can have the best programs and all the best computers. And
so,
comments.
Well, I think the simple line is all schooling is homeschooling. You know, when a child goes away to school, you could think of the school as the research center where they find out about things they don't know about in the home. But I think learning that children actually do is done at home, whether they go to school or they're homeschooled. That's where they do it, and all of the successful systems of education I know about have had a strong notion of parental responsibility. Also, I happen to think homeschooling is a good idea in general. It's more efficient. The kids have more of a chance to do projects. There are lots of good reasons for it. But to me, the motivation that you mentioned, why your daughter wants to do those programs, is the main motivation for why kids want to do most things. They want to be like adults, and they need to have adults that they want to be like.
Well, I'll yield back the balance of my time for the sake of efficiency, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Weldon. Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have brief comments. It is no secret that, you know, education is the real foundation for the future of this country. And I wonder, I'm sorry I didn't hear all of your testimony. I was detained in another meeting, but when and how can we make sure that every teacher becomes comfortable with the available technology rather than computers just being in the computer classes? That seems to be a problem in my general area. I don't know whether it's a problem in other places, that the teachers don't want to deal with the available technology.
When I work with teachers who are not interested in technology, I get good results by talking to them about their love of children and their love of their subject. Because there are many teachers now who enter teaching because they love children, but who feel cut off from their students by the structure of the traditional school, or who entered education because they fell in love with their subject, but now who were cut off from that by the structure of standardized testing. And to show them that there are new models of learning that are possible, that may take technology to implement, but that reestablish that kind of relationship with a learner and with subject and with resources outside of the school, gets those teachers very excited, not about the technology, but about the new model of learning. And I think that that's the key to involving teachers. Teachers are very interested in learning.
Thank you. I found that teachers are very interested in learning, but also very intimidated by some of the technology. In terms of educational opportunity, it has been my experience that when teachers do show that interest, notwithstanding what the student looks like, the student is in an environment that they have an opportunity to learn better. But students do have to see the value of education. When they see that their parents go through college and high school and don't have opportunities, I have been challenged in saying, why should I do it? I see my father suffering through this every day. How do we approach that type of problem?
Well, that's kind of your job, isn't it? I mean, what I'm saying is
but I'm in a minority.
I think it's just really I was talking about Congress. I think it's a really hard problem, and I can't really. Oh, okay. I thought you were asking us a question that we're supposed to.
I thought you might make us some suggestions in front of God and everybody.
I think the problem of having somebody go through college and not being able to get a job is a question I can't give an answer to. But I think to the question.
But how do you convince students, the children of these parents who are having these problems, that education is worth it?
I don't know, but maybe Seymour does.
Well, I'd just like to say something about a way in which that question is badly formulated, because when we say education is worthwhile or not, you're saying to this little kid, do this because in 12 years' time, you're going to get a job. And the kid isn't a dupe. The kid knows that's BS. On the other hand, every kid is interested in something, is desperately, deeply, passionately interested in something. And there isn't any content that couldn't be used as a means of coming into, of getting at powerful ideas, getting at deep skills of how to run projects, how to do things. The trouble with school is that it calls itself education. It pretends that anybody can be, quote, motivated by what's going to happen in 12 years' time. They're not. We can restructure the learning environment so that people can learn from what they're interested in. Now, this doesn't mean they can do whatever they like. It doesn't mean we don't have standards. It doesn't mean we don't insist that they work hard. But it does mean that we apply intellectual effort to identifying the kind of powerful ideas that can be accessed through these activities. And apropos of that, I'd like to add to David Shaw's criticism of the small amount of research that's done in education. I mean, as he said, research in education often means finding out whether it works or not. Yeah. But if you compare that with what happens to drug companies, only a small amount is finding out whether it works or not. Most of it is finding the stuff that works.
Yeah, that's right.
And in education, it is almost impossible to get funding for finding out new things, as opposed to, well, here we've got this model and we're going to do a controlled experiment to find out if it works. We need to create new forms of knowledge.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Time, gentlelady, has expired. Mr. Baker.
I'd like to follow up on Mr. Foley's comment, and you can never come to a hearing where you don't learn something, and I was very amused by the professor's comment regarding the refrigerator. We only have to look on the wall here where in Proverbs it says, where there's no vision, people perish. You said if you invented a refrigerator but tell people it's only going to lower the temperature 1 degree, who would buy it? And we're in education, we've been in education now for 50 years, and we say if you just give us 10 more bucks, we'll make it all better. Same broken system, just pile more money on top. So here's what we have. We have a group in Milwaukee working among the poorest students in the world, financially poor, potentially they're rich, but they're poor students. They don't have a background of education. They don't have 2 parents with PhDs, and they want to have charter schools. They want to try something new. Well, after the unions get through with them, the court system steps in, and they'll be 120 years old before they can try an experimental school. And so when you say we need a new refrigerator that does more than lower it 1 degree, are you right? We've got to experiment. We've got to have vision. We're the only nation in the world that teaches one language poorly. And we say, just give us more money. Nationwide, as someone mentioned, we're spending $6,500. That's only $180,000 a classroom. That's bureaucracy. The teacher doesn't make $180,000. The kids don't get paid to be there. Where's that money going? And can we hire 3 nuns with 3 rulers and say, build us a better system? Yes, we can. And we're not allowed to do it. This is the most static world in the world is education world, and it should be the freest. Would you like to comment on that crazy idea?
Well, I'm not sure the 3 nuns with the 3 rulers is quite the way you want to go.
It's the way I want to go right now, but I'd like to turn them on Congress. Okay. Any other question? I'm going to yield 30 seconds to Duke when you're through, Professor.
Well, let's have. I just want to. What you say is absolutely right, that we can't go throwing more money at people who are going to make minor changes to the same system, and that's been the moral right through. We've got to find a way of fostering very different innovation. And those people, you need to find some way not to send 3 nuns out, but to enable your people in Milwaukee to be able to do their experiment. And surely that can't be beyond the Congress of the United States of America.
Just a quick one, and I would make a comment to Ms. Johnson. One of the most difficult things I had to do in a squadron was to get senior chief petty officers and master chief petty officers to use a computer after doing it with a pencil for 25 years. My master chief was computer illiterate. We mandated that every one of the chiefs went to National University to become computer literate, and you saw it take off from there, the petty officers, and it went right on down the line. So recommendation, get someone that's fired up about it to show them how it saves time, and I think it'll help.
Okay. Yield back, Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Appreciate it. With that, we will thank the first panel. It was an excellent panel, very lively discussion, and I'm delighted with what we got. We thank you very much for participating, and invite the second panel to join us at the table. What I'm going to do to try to make time work a little bit better here, what I propose to do is to take the names of members that are in the room as this panel is testifying and as they come into the room, and anybody who's in the room while the panel is actually giving their testimony will then be called upon for questions. People who come into the room later on and so on, we will save for the next panel. So we will try to make certain that the people who ask the questions are the people who are here for the testimony. We welcome each of you here and thank you for coming. I'm going to again go by my chart that kind of goes the other way this time. We'll start with Mr. McCracken, then Mr. Wright, Mr. Mendenhall, and finish up with Mr. Joseph. Mr. McCracken, we would invite you to give your testimony. We thank you for being here. I understand that you could be traveling other places today and decided instead that this was important enough for you to do it. We thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to ask for permission to submit my prepared statement for the record.
Without objection.
And I have five points I'd really like to talk about today. First is we must prepare our children for the information age. We're somewhat overwhelmed today by what's happening with technology and how rapid the change is, but by the year 2007, and 12 years from now, when children entering our school system graduate from high school, there will be a 1,000 times change in what can be done with computer systems in terms of price and performance. That means that systems that cost $1 million today will cost $1,000 in the year 2007. There will be an equivalent change in the speed of communication, which means that instead of just having voice communication, we'll have inexpensive pictures, video, interactive games, virtual reality over the network. And what that means is that we'll have the capability that the designers of Jurassic Park and Forrest Gump and Pocahontas will have those capabilities. We'll have the capabilities the designers of the Ford Taurus and the Boeing 777 had available to us for just a few $100s. Typically under $500 in those days. Our country's economic competitiveness will be determined by our mastery of these tools. There's a term that the Yankee Group in Boston uses to describe children, a certain type of children. They call it taffies. It's used to describe children of technically advantaged families. I know my kids are that way. I have an art student daughter who uses computers to do her art. She passes that around over the net. She also does her banking on the net and keeps track of 20 to 50 friends continuously over the net. Those are taffies, children of technically advantaged families. I believe that schools are the only way to give all Americans a chance in the information society, an equal opportunity in the information age. An example of that is in Silicon Valley, where I come from. Today, an increasingly high percentage of all job postings occur on the network. If you're not wired, if you're not part of the information society, you just don't know about the new jobs. The second point I'd like to talk about is that we need a national initiative. I've had the opportunity over the last 2 years to co-chair the President's Advisory Council on the National Information Infrastructure. This 37-member council has had the opportunity to conduct hearings around the country. We've deliberated many issues, but we've determined that the best way to kickstart the country into the information age is to ensure that every child in America has access to the data superhighway in their classrooms and libraries by the year 2000. We've learned that, of course, that you not only have to master the information tools, but these same tools can be used to master mathematics, reading, and they have a tremendous impact on simple things like school attendance and excitement about learning, as we heard in the last panel. The third point I'd like to make is that these technologies are affordable. 1 year ago, the Council commissioned McKinsey, the consulting firm, to study the costs associated with schools and the information superhighway. In a soon-to-be-released report, they indicate that schools can be outfitted with one classroom with computers, complete range of computers, for about 2% of the total educational budget, and that every classroom can be outfitted with computers connected to the internet for about 4% of total educational spending on an ongoing basis. This includes the cost of technology, the cost of support, and also teacher education. This brings up part 4, which is teacher retraining. The most significant cost in this study is not hardware, it's not network capability, but it's teacher re-education. It's the most significant issue. The educational system today offers little incentive to encourage teachers to acquire and apply technology skills. And state credentialing requirements in most states do not require it. Teacher college training programs do not require it for graduation. And in-service training programs need to be revamped to develop and reward technical skills. Today's teachers have little computer experience. Quite often they've opted to go into teaching to avoid technical education, and we need to make substantial change in this area. Finally, we learned that there was a significant commonality between all of the projects we saw in this area that were successful, and that was inspired local community leadership. As we traveled around the country, visiting schools, using computers, we found one common factor: individual initiative and local leadership, from parents, teachers, administrators, business people, and others. An example of that is in Silicon Valley, where local business leaders have contributed $20 million to be spent over the next 3 years to improve the education in Silicon Valley schools using technology. I urge each of you and your colleagues to help kickstart this effort in your own districts. You and your constituents have an opportunity to accomplish something that will benefit all of our children and prepare us for this information age in the 21st century. I actually bring a message of hope. I believe we can do this.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mr. Wright.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committees. My name is Pat Wright. I'm Vice President of Educational Technologies for Telecommunications Incorporated, TCI. Our nation's elementary and secondary schools are facing enormously difficult challenges. Bringing about lasting change for the better will be a complicated process requiring difficult choices in the public and in the private sector. But technology can and will make an important positive contribution. Technology is transforming all our nation's institutions. This transformation is being driven by the convergence of 3 critical developments. First, fiber optics, which has become the most cost-effective broadband communications infrastructure. Second, high-speed microprocessing, which allows all kinds of digital processing at very low cost. And third, operating system software that links personal computers via high-capacity digital networks. When coupled with the digitization of print, audio, and video, this technological convergence makes multimedia and interactive media more than just buzzwords. TCI is committed to making education one of the first direct beneficiaries of this technological transformation. Technological advances are beginning to transform our educational system from an industrial-based model to an information-based model. The new information-based model eliminates the barriers of time and location. In today's education system, students must be ready to learn when teachers are ready to teach, and they are limited to the classroom environment. Technology unbinds the educational experience. Learning will take on a whole new look and feel. What we're likely to see is real-time presentation, online conferencing, and artificial intelligence that will allow students to access high-quality, interactive multimedia resources where and when they are needed. This is the 21st century version of the old Zen proverb, when the mind is ready, a teacher will appear. Equally important, technology will allow students to draw expertise from many sources simultaneously. Courses of the future will combine the expertise of many teachers and other experts electronically. Teachers will be transformed from dispensers of knowledge to facilitators of learning. This fact in itself represents one of the most dramatic paradigm shifts ever imagined in terms of the curriculum of the future. In order to ensure that the transformation of our education system occurs efficiently, we need strong cooperative partnerships between educators and industry. In particular, I want to stress our company's view that educators, in collaboration with parents and other stakeholders, must determine the shape, focus, and functionality of the classroom of the future. Industry can create a group of educational tools, but educators and parents must determine how to adapt these tools to their particular local curriculum needs. Of course, industry must play an important role in helping educators make informed decisions about how to use technology. There are a host of new skills that educators will need if they're going to be effective in applying the new technologies in their classroom. That's why TCI has created the J.C. Sparkman Center for Educational Technology. The Sparkman Center is a technologically advanced facility that provides hands-on training to help educators find solutions for the new learning environment. And it features a variety of of technologies, both existing and emerging. Educators who attend the center, return to their communities with a better understanding of how they can integrate the tools more effectively. Moreover, because the transformation to an information-based education system is complicated, we've developed a 5-point turnkey solution that we believe deserves some consideration. This approach provides schools with a complete package of hardware, software, broadband, network connections, teacher training, maintenance, and support on a leased basis for a fixed cost per student per year. This one-stop shopping approach will simplify educators' efforts to retool schools with new technology. If properly used, even over a short period of time, these new technology tools can produce dramatic results. One concrete example is provided by TCI's Showcase Schools projects located across the nation. In these projects, we've collaborated directly with faculty, parents, and other stakeholders to design model programs. These schools operate as laboratories for educators across the country. In Carrollton, Georgia, for example, TCI established a fiber optic ring connecting all classrooms and homes, as well as the juvenile court system and all the social service agencies. 6 multimedia computers and extensive video networks were installed in every classroom. Over the past 4 years, the results have been encouraging. Dropout rates in that school district have been reduced from 28% to 5%. Failure rates have been reduced dramatically. As a result, the school has saved nearly $1 million a year without raising an additional dollar in taxes. Carrollton has substantial funds now that can be used to hire new teachers, upgrade special education classes, repaint classrooms, or use for a variety of other purposes. The point is not always to raise new funds, but to redirect existing funds more efficiently. TCI has constructed showcase schools in Oregon, Colorado, Texas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Georgia, here in Washington, D.C., and Louisiana. While technologies will do wonders to transform our education system, we must honestly acknowledge that this transformation is financially daunting. No company or industry can do it for free. It's been estimated that $41.5 billion is required for the hardware, software, and infrastructure to transform our public schools to the information-based model. Notwithstanding these costs, I believe industry, and certainly the cable industry, is committed to undertaking the transformation in a way that recognizes our obligations to the communities in which we live. Educators have told us that they face 3 major obstacles in taking advantages of the new technologies. First, the initial capital cost to install the technology and the supportive networks is prohibitively high. Second, technologies tended to become obsolete in a relatively short period of time. And third, technology expenditures have tended to be unpredictable and therefore difficult to budget for. As I mentioned, TCI's turnkey approach allows schools to lease a bundled package, lease arrangements for an 8-year period at a fixed rate, and we address the hardware needs at certain intervals throughout the process. In addition to these things, we would consider the networking portion of the School of the Future, or the wide area network of the School of the Future, to be a connection to homes as well. And to that end, we're very willing and are encouraged to enter into revenue sharing types of situations between schools and homes to further offset costs. Finally, I want to address another complex issue, ensuring that low-income and rural areas share fully in the benefits of the new technology. We simply must find ways to apply educational technology in an egalitarian fashion, and we're committed to this goal. We recognize that we don't have all the answers. That's why our showcase projects are operating around the country, but we're beginning to generate some real-life experiences, and hopefully solutions will follow. I hope my testimony today has been helpful. We all have to work harder and more collaboratively in this area. However, we're very optimistic about the future given the current state of technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. Mendenhall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was happy to hear as we began this morning that this committee is not only about technology but about education, because I think we need to focus on education as opposed to the technology. I've been involved in educational technology for 20 years and currently oversee IBM's K-12 education business, and yet I have to say that we are, in general, wasting the money in our schools that we're spending on technology. And the reason for that is that it is not a matter of infrastructure, and our focus has been on technology infrastructure. We spend on computers and wiring and hooking things up, and then there are 3 more studies written that say computers are in classrooms and don't make a difference because we're going about it the wrong way. Most technology plans in our country focus on getting 1 computer for every 5 or 6 children, or on getting wired, as opposed to focusing on the outcomes or results that we hope to achieve from the technology. At the same time, we set aside 25 or 30% of the technology money to train teachers, but that training is more focused on making them computer experts than it is on making them better teachers through the use of technology. There's an idea by some as we look into the future that talks about access for all, computers for everyone, all content available, incidentally for free, on the network. And somehow this revolution in technology will sweep away schools and provide for learning anytime, anywhere. My view is that that's an unrealistic vision of the future, not because the technology won't be there or allow us to do it, but for a couple of other significant reasons. First of all, the technology won't be everywhere, at least for 20 years. It will not be in the homes of the very poor in our country, and that's a population that's growing. If it is in those homes, it won't be used because of what Mr. Goodling said earlier about dysfunctional families. Those kids don't go home except to sleep, and sometimes not even to sleep. They don't have parents to work with them on computer applications. And schools become, therefore, our last resort for access and for equity for a larger and larger percentage of our children. Even with access, a lot of the best content won't be free. And as we focus on getting access for everyone, we have to recognize that the best content will be created by private enterprise and will be created with a profit in mind. The real problem is that this great infrastructure will be created largely into homes by the entertainment industry, just as TV was. And I think we face the same challenge in entertainment versus education on the new network. As Dr. Kay said earlier, the content exists today in books, in libraries, even educational TV. But our children are not availing themselves. I mean, they do not choose to watch educational TV. Those are not in the top 10 programs. They're not accessing the information in books. And yet we somehow believe that by putting it online, they will all desire to do that as opposed to play games or chat across the network. We do need radical reform, but we still need schools. In fact, I think we have no choice but to improve our nation's schools. And I will also say that I think technology is the only option for real change in education. The reason we have to change is the amount of information in the world will double 4 times by the time my daughter in kindergarten graduates from high school. So the old model of a teacher standing in front of a classroom delivering content, the knowledge that you're supposed to know, is outdated. Education has to change to teach our children how to access information, how to find information, how to acquire it, apply it, use it. And in order to do that, we're going to have to retrain the workforce, which are the teachers in this country. And it will require a substantial investment to do that. By the way, computers are cost-effective in the classroom. You need approximately a computer for 20% of the kids in a classroom. You need equal funding, however, for applications and training. That amounts to 3 to 5% of the school budget on an ongoing basis. Technology is not a one-time event. But for that, we have proven time and time again that we can get 20% learning improvement. I'll say that again, 20% learning improvement for 3 to 4% of the school budget. Now, that's on standardized tests because that's our best measure today, but perhaps we have even more learning improvement if we had better tests. Therefore, my recommendations are the following. Number one, we need to direct more funding to technology. Even as we cut educational funding, we can nevertheless direct more of it to technology as opposed to using it to support the status quo in our schools. Number two, for that which we spend on technology, for every dollar spent on infrastructure, we should match it with a dollar spent on the applications and the training to make that infrastructure meaningful in our schools. Number three, we must tie the funding to actual outcomes, to the results we expect in improved learning, to keep it from being wasted. And number four, we do need affordable access in schools and libraries across this country, because that is where the lower portion of our population in particular will get their access and get their education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mendenhall. Committee is now in a dilemma. We have a vote on the floor. This is a vote to recommit the bill, which is obviously going to lose from the initial vote count. Then we are going to have a vote on final passage. At that point, this committee, meaning the Science Committee, has its bill on the floor. So what I've asked to be done here is I've asked Mr. Ehlers to come back as Vice Chairman of the Science Committee and begin chairing the committee. Mr. Joseph, I think what we will do is wait and take your testimony right after the vote is over. I apologize to the panel for this and to the next panel for it, but we will take a break now. We stand in recess to go vote, and then we'll come back and resume the session. Well, as soon as the second vote is over, we intend to resume.
We'll continue with the second panel of this joint hearing after a few programming notes.
I'm to associate myself with your remarks.
Saturday on our companion network C-SPAN, former Secretary of State James Baker at the National Press Club. See his remarks and the question and answer session that follows at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 Pacific, on our companion network C-SPAN. After former Secretary of State Baker's remarks on Saturday on America and the Courts, we examine the case Romer versus Evans, argued this week before the Supreme Court. The case tests a Colorado constitutional amendment prohibiting special protection for homosexuals. America and the Courts, C-SPAN's weekly look at the nation's judiciary. Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 Pacific, after the National Press Club. We'll now return to the second panel of this joint House Science Committee and House Economic and Education Committee.
I ask my colleagues to take their places, and we will resume the hearing. We apologize once again to the panel that we were interrupted by a vote, and particularly apologize to Mr. Joseph. But unfortunately, that's a fact of life in this particular part of the world. Once again, we thank you for coming and appreciate the comments we've heard thus far. And we'll turn now to Mr. Joseph and from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here actually all morning, now into the afternoon. It's been a very fascinating discussion. Obviously, this is a topic of great interest to virtually every American, and Congress must wrestle with what role, if any, should it have in trying to accelerate this. We appreciate you accepting our full statement into the record. In that full statement, we attempt to try and address all the fundamental issues you have in your background papers, so I'm not going to go into those in detail now, but I would like to say that just listening for the last 3 hours sort of forced the last 25 years of my life to flash before my eyes to 25 years ago when I was an inner-city classroom teacher in Baltimore, experiencing firsthand some of the problems with public education, to 1979 when I started teaching in graduate schools here in the D.C. area and started seeing firsthand why business people were saying that the product of education wasn't quite what they thought it once was, to sitting with Ted Bell in 1983 when the Reagan administration came out with the Nation at Risk document and agreeing with him that chambers all around the country would hold meetings so he could be on the stump and from the top down tell people about why we needed to raise teacher salaries and adopt schools and support public-private partnerships and do all these wonderful things that we're going to try and put American education back on track, to 1990 when President Bush and the governors went off to Charlottesville because the nation at risk warnings and the additional $1 trillion we spend as a nation on public education made no real impression in terms of outcomes, to working with the Bush administration to try and set up the New American Schools Development Corporation as the bellwether leader that would show us how to bring in a new generation of schools so we would have learners that can compete on the world scale, to even being back here as a witness in the 1991 hearings that were originally held by the Science Committee on the importance of and significance of educational technology. And the reason I was here in 91 was because the business community has been at the forefront in understanding the significance of injecting technology into the school process, because the workplace, as we all understand, is much more sophisticated and needs to be competitive in the global marketplace. And when we surveyed 3,000 chambers back in 1990 about how we could most effectively represent them in Washington with regard to education and training reform, 2,000 responded that their highest priority we could do for them would be to get the Congress to understand that we had to get more technology into schools. That was the #1 recommendation from 2,000 chambers 5 years ago. Now, what we have over the last decade, I mean 10, 15 years ago when computers first came out into schools, the answer was if we had one computer in a school, that would fix and start the restructuring process. Then it became, well, we need one per classroom. Then we needed a full learning lab. Now we need to have access to the internet. Well, as far as I understand, the D.C. public school system has access to the internet, and that Bell Atlantic wires outside the building can all get you there. But 50% of the schools in D.C. inside the building have rotary phone lines that won't allow them to talk to anyone. And of all the other half of the schools that do have digital lines, only 4, in fact, have modems that have them connected to the internet. But euphemistically, we can say all D.C. schools have access to the internet, but the reality is very few students and very few teachers here in D.C. even have a clue what the internet is. That's not to say that there aren't phenomenal things going on everywhere, and we've had a number of examples cited this morning. We've had them cited in articles and publications and TV documentaries over the last 10, 15 years. But the bottom line is, in terms of the totality of this country, how do we go to scale? How do we get technology into the classroom everywhere so it benefits all Americans? And I don't want to make it sound like the technology is the answer, that there aren't these other issues that Chairman Goodling mentioned, like the dysfunctional family and other social problems that are very much part of the equation with regard to the state of education today. But it's not that complicated. The original, I think, diagnosis goes back to Ben Franklin, who said, tell me, I'll probably forget over time, teach me, hopefully I'll remember, but involve me, and I will learn. And it's the technology coming into the learning process that allows for the involvement of young people today. And young people go to school and don't find schools a very relevant place compared to the rest of their lives. The rest of their lives are spent in a fast-paced MTV, video game, high-tech world, and then by and large they go to classrooms that haven't changed for 40, 50, or 60 years. The notion of redesigning schools is a wonderful idea, but there are too many communities in this country with 100-year-old school buildings that they can't even restructure because they have too much asbestos in the ceiling, and so they have the dilemma of we better leave it alone rather than trying even to take it out. We also have the dilemma of the communities trying to figure out where they find the money to do everything, because the public at large has grown somewhat queasy about being willing to put more and more money into local school systems, because we've been talking about fixing education in this country for 15 years with no real discernible results. And so the issue is, how do we go to scale? both financially and technologically. How do we get each of the classrooms in America to have that optimum ratio of 1 computer for every 3 students? And how do we make sure that each of the 2.5 million teachers in this country are trained and understand how to best maximize what their role is in the classroom, how to bring the instructional material in line with the curriculum and the preordained tests that are presumed to be the diagnosis of what we know in this country? And how do we do that in anyone's lifetime? Because as I sit here and I said, as I listened to I saw the last 25 years of my life in terms of involvement with education sort of go through, we're only 50 months away from the year 2000. President Clinton is challenging industry leaders to wire up every classroom by the year 2000. That means we have to do 50,000 classrooms a month between now and the year 2000, 50,000 a month. It's just straight mathematics. Obviously, we're not doing 50,000 a month. Now, if we were only to decide we could do 10,000 classrooms a year and train 10,000 teachers a year to maximize this potential we're giving them, which would be a huge challenge. At the rate of 10,000 classrooms and 10,000 teachers a year, it takes you 250 years to get to all 2.5 million classrooms and all 2.5 million teachers. So I say that, the issue, I think, before Congress is reflective of the broader debate that's going on here in this town, which deals with the real relationship between the federal government and the state and local governments, and where power resides and who's going to be responsible for what programs. And of course, we know that most money in education is not federal. But conversely, the states are going to be asked to do more and more in different areas, and they're going to be wondering where they're going to be doing it from what sums. Yet, we have a general consensus in this country that adding educational technology to the learning process would be good for our children. It's essential in terms of retraining adult workers. It's essential for retraining senior citizens who want to go back to the workforce. It is the state of the art in terms of the kinds of curriculum materials that are being developed in this country. And it begs the issue, why can't we collaboratively, federal, state, and local, come up with one plan that everyone buys into that says, not unlike 100 years ago, that one-room schoolhouse was the center of the community where all the students went, that the schools become the center of the learning universe in every community, and collaboratively, government and the private sector think through their education and training needs and make sure they channel those resources into those school buildings so that every community suddenly finds the resources and the customers, if you will, who will pay for the expansion and development of the kinds of learning technologies that are so dramatically needed. Now, if we can't figure out how to pay for it, how is the rest of the world going to figure out how to pay for it? Because the reality is, in the global marketplace, if you don't have world-class workers, you're not going to survive. And yet, lesser developed countries already have proposals before the World Bank and other international lending agencies for them to fund the kinds of systems I'm talking about, where government themselves become a user of these technology platforms because they've got to figure out something to do with their people anyway and a better way to deliver government services. So if they can get private sector investment to set these technology learning centers up and commit to use them over a period of time, the funds will flow to do this. And this is an idea, as I said, that there are proposals in the World Bank right now. So the rest of the world is moving in this direction. In some instances, it's going to be easier for some countries to do this because they have dictatorial autocratic systems. They'll say, as they're doing in China, let's do this, and they'll do it. We have 15,300 local school districts that each have to come to agreement on what they want to do. And I've seen, as I said, for the last 15 years, there's never consensus on the part of each of the 15,300 school districts. They all are trying to do the right thing. They all are doing positive things. But they all aren't doing things that synergistically bring you a national plan that works for the whole country. And so, what I'd like to draw to your attention and to the members of the combined committees, especially because both Mr. Goodling and Mr. Walker are from Pennsylvania, interesting project going on in Pennsylvania and 4 contiguous states, West Virginia, Virginia, Maryland, and D.C., where the state governments are working in conjunction with the National Guard. The National Guard has a need for high-tech training in all the communities for the weekend warriors. National Guard can't afford to build the same technology platforms over and over again with technology continuing to change, but they can afford to make use of them or rent their time on the system. National Guard also has historic commitments within the state of providing a lot of civic services and doing other things that correspond with their existing series of missions. And so in Pennsylvania, for example, a new coalition, the Pennsylvania Information Highway Consortium, has come together with the leaders of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce and the State Telephone Association, the State Cable Association, State Public Utility Association, the State Rural Electric Co-op Association, and the major educational institutions like Penn State. And they're collaboratively thinking through how do we have our members make use of the sites that DOD also wants to make use of. And there are 10 locations already identified in Pennsylvania where they are collaboratively working. And I also list in a pen to the back of the testimony just an interesting series of articles from Huntington, West Virginia, because West Virginia is one of these pilot states also where in a week's period of time, this was the only thing newspaper where the local chamber has a meeting and people come together and they start thinking this thing through, and suddenly the whole town's talking about how do we collaboratively come together and figure out the economics to make this thing work. So what I'm suggesting to the Congress and to policymakers is that we have to think about going to scale in someone's lifetime, which is going to require bigger models than one company and one school district or one state. It's got to be multi-state, it's got to be national, and it has to fit into the international framework of global competition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph, and thank you again to the panel. We'll now proceed with questions from the members present. I happen to be first simply because I reserved my time the first round, and I have one comment relating to the discussion we had in the first round, and actually I'd love to ask all these questions from everyone in all the panels, but you're the intermediate panel, you're going to get the question. But first I wanted to simply respond to a comment made during the previous one that the time horizons in Congress are 2 years. That is certainly not true. Many of us have very long-range planning horizons. Supposedly Newt Gingrich's are half a millennium into the future. And many of us also engage in a great deal of futuristic thinking. The 2-year planning horizon, of course, is an insult to the Congress because that implies we only look to the next election. And obviously we do politically, but not in terms of policy. It's unfortunately a myth perpetuated by the news media based upon campaign rhetoric, and I just wanted to set the record straight on that. As far as questions are concerned, I've spent a good share of my life in education. I spent 22 years in a college classroom teaching physics. I also voluntarily, much to the surprise of my colleagues, elected to choose a course on science for future elementary school teachers. My colleagues regarded that as the greatest self-punishment that anyone could inflict upon themselves, and in some cases they were right. But I was convinced the only way we could break the cycle of scientific illiteracy in this nation is to change the information base and the teaching techniques of the elementary school classroom teachers. That was a great experience for me. I learned a great deal, and I think my students did also. But throughout that process, I became very, very impressed. I think there are two issues that are of fundamental importance to the success of any educational program. One is the full-fledged interest and involvement of the parents, which I believe is the #1 requirement for successful education. And secondly, teachers who are given adequate materials and proper training to use the materials. And when I think back on what used to be called new math and its limited success, I think in both points it failed. The teachers, in many cases, were not adequately trained. Even worse, when the students went home with their homework and asked their parents to help them, the parents just sort of threw up their hands and said, "This is stupid. I've never seen anything like this before. What is set theory all about, and what does that have to do with adding 2 + 2? And at that point, the students immediately felt, well, of what value is this new math? I'm very concerned about both of those aspects as it relates to our topic of today. I find many parents who just sit in wonderment and amazement at their children using computers, and the standard response is, "I'll never learn how to operate that, so that's the next generation, we'll let them do it." that's going to be very detrimental to the sort of things we're using, because what we're talking about here is much more than simply learning how to use a computer. We're talking about altering the way the instructional process works. We're talking about the emphasis on teaching children to think, teaching children how to learn. And without proper involvement of the parents, that's not going to succeed very well. As Mr. Joseph pointed out, we also have a tremendous teacher training problem. I am not, frankly, I'm not worried at all about wiring the classrooms. That's a technical problem. The industry is capable of doing it when the money is there, and that can be handled quite readily. But training the teachers, giving them the background they need, not just to handle a computer, but to deal with a totally new approach to learning, is a monumental task. The federal government has a very limited role in this, but it does have a role. And I would be interested in the responses of each of you as you take a look at what the federal government can do, but also just share your knowledge with the nation as to what you believe the elementary, secondary schools can do in terms of dealing with the training of parents and the training of teachers vis-a-vis the new educational approaches that are coming down the pike. One other quick side comment. One of the problems of the schools is, of course, that society keeps giving schools tasks that are not educational in nature, but are social programs of one sort or another. I don't know the answer to that, but if you answer the first questions about parent training and teacher training and have time left over, feel free to address the broader question. Mr. McCracken?
Teacher education in this area is very important. I think somewhere between 10 and 20 of the states have something in their credentialing associated with technology. About 50% of all teachers have ever used a computer of any kind, and even that is very minor usage. And the thing that bothers me the most is that current graduates of graduate schools of education throughout the country also immediately need to be retrained to prepare themselves for this environment. There are just a couple of teacher credentialing agencies for the graduate schools of education in the country. I think pressure can be applied there at a national level. I think a national vision is appropriate, but I'm convinced that the answer is in the community, that there are inspired community leaders in every community in America that can put together the programs necessary to train parents, to train teachers, to get involved, to get business involved, local business involved. And I agree that we're only talking about a very small percentage of educational spending. I believe the resources can be found locally to solve this problem. But I think we need to give at a national level almost permission for these inspired leaders to put programs together. So I think there is a national role in terms of vision. I agree with the parents issue. When you have parents that can get involved. In fact, the experiments have shown places like Union City, New Jersey, that have put right up front a computer at home, a computer in teachers' homes, and then computers in the classroom, all networked together, that you get tremendous impact on the educational system. In fact, in Union City, New Jersey, teacher absenteeism went from 17% to 0. So it can make a difference.
Fine, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, you raised a very critical point, and I think to address it, I think we have to, again, rethink the tools we're using in this, in addressing the training dilemma that we're facing. We've done several experiments along these lines in terms of how school districts go about this training issue today. And usually it's relocating professionals off-site, hiring substitute teachers to come in and so forth, which is an added expense to the organization to do the training. In thinking about the tools and where they're located and the types of tools, I think we can rethink the way we deliver training and how it's delivered and how it's designed and organized. And I think the same thing's true for parents. We found that there generally are 3 questions that are asked in most American homes across the country when children come in the evening. Class today, what's tonight's homework, and how can I help? And it's very difficult to get good answers to those questions on a regular basis. The good news is we're seeing a convergence of technology. It's becoming more and more difficult to discern your computer from your telephone, and as we move forward, your computer from your television set. Access from home to that information at school in a seamless manner is certainly something we can look forward to in the not too distant future. And assuming that those tools and the infrastructure to support that type of seamless connectivity can be brought into place, I think we're in a better position to address this huge issue of training. It's not only training, it's also support and maintenance. Who's going to monitor these networks? Who's going to repair these machines if they're not functioning properly? And that becomes more and more an issue as we think in terms of a critical mass of the appropriate tools at the classroom level and in the home. So we have to think creatively along those lines. But I think when we think about technology, the tool sets, the type of infrastructure we're foreseeing, we're optimistic that, that this what appears to be a daunting problem in terms of training is perhaps less so if we can rethink the way we go about it.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Mendenhall.
Thank you. I said earlier in my testimony that I think technology is the only option for real change in education. One of the reasons I said that is that we all generally agree on elements of education reform, namely that teachers ought to become more instructional mentors and coaches, that students need to become more active learners, and that parents need to be more involved. We've found the implementation of technology in the school enables those things to happen because it changes the basic structure of a teacher standing in front of a classroom of 30 students and addressing content, communicating content. The minute you put 5 computers in the classroom, that teacher has a decision to make. Either they sit in the corner unused, which unfortunately is the decision in a lot of classrooms today, while the teacher delivers a lecture, or we restructure the classroom. And when we restructure the classroom, we typically will go put about 10 students on 5 computers, and they're working in pairs, which are developing a lot of important other kinds of skills like teamwork and collaboration and team teaching. A third of the group typically will be involved in independent kinds of study activities, hopefully structured. And thirdly, the teacher will then be able to work with a third of the students in a smaller setting. We've just effectively reduced the class size, for example, from 30 to 10. That doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen simply. The concept that we just put technology into the classroom and train teachers on technology and somehow they'll figure out how to use it, how to change the classroom, how to restructure what they do, has proven over the last 15 years not to be true. Most of the teacher in service that we've done for the last 15 years has focused on getting teachers comfortable with technology. We teach them DOS and Windows and hard drives and floppy drives and RAM and ROM. In other words, we make them expert in computers. And the reason we talk a lot about teacher resistance is no one ever relates it to what am I supposed to do with it to be a better teacher. And I think the training that we need to focus on for our teachers is this is a tool that will make you a better teacher, that will enable you to do different things. And we find teachers that use the tool effectively in that way will never go back to the old way of teaching because they're now able to individualize and really help Johnny and Julie and really do what they entered the teaching profession to do. I think the whole idea of teachers resisting technology is a myth. What they resist is being asked to learn a new profession or a new technology that doesn't relate meaningfully to what it is they're trying to do. Interestingly enough, in that restructured classroom, there's now a meaningful role for the first time for a parent. Because as you have a third of the students doing independent study in a classroom, we find parental volunteers, almost always with those groups of individual students, working with them, answering questions, mentoring them. So parents are involved in the classroom. I volunteer at my children's school. Volunteering at a school today means you drive on field trips or bring donuts on the birthday. That's not a meaningful environment. That does not encourage parental involvement. Being able to come and be an aide in the classroom and interact with students doing projects and meaningful work and being able to help them brings parents back and makes them interested in the process in schools. Finally, you're absolutely right that parental involvement is the most important factor identified in educational success. Unfortunately, a number of our students in schools come from dysfunctional families, do not have parental support at home, sometimes through no fault of the parent who has to hold 2 jobs in order to support a family. But our school structure has to compensate for that weakness, as opposed to simply let those kids drop through the crack because we don't have the parental support which we need. I don't think it's essential that parents learn how to use computers in order to provide that support. We find across the country that parents actually support computers overwhelmingly because they believe, perhaps more than any of us, that it is the one thing that can make a difference in schools. So we've seen school districts where the last 4 bonds turned down unanimously pass a bond for technology 7-1, because the parents feel that we're not just going to throw more money at the old system, technology can make a difference in schools. So the children have the support. Parents are going out who can barely afford it and buying PCs and educational programs to give their children head start in schools. They frankly do not have to know how to run it. They don't have to necessarily work it with their child. Their support is demonstrated by their financial commitment, by their working with the children in home to encourage them to do that. So I'm very encouraged that parents will support it, are supporting it today. The key, I think, is we train teachers properly to integrate it into their teaching. And again, quit focusing on, gee, if we put computers out there, somehow they'll magically figure out how to transform education and students will magically want to learn as opposed to play Nintendo games, because there's no evidence that that will happen.
Thank you very much. Mr. Joseph?
I'd like to associate myself with Mr. Mendenhall's remarks. I agree with all of them, but I think that a couple other points are relevant. What I find absolutely amazing is a statistic in the August '95 issue of Curriculum Administrator magazine, which is what professional K-12 curriculum administrators read. And as they surveyed their own peers, they discovered that 36% of teachers are enthusiastic about using technology in the classroom. Now, on one hand, you say, well, that means 2/3 of the teachers aren't, but I'm saying if 1/3 of them already are enthusiastic and most of them have old Apple IIs, what does that portend for the future? Now, the good news is that about 6% of teachers retire every year. So that other 60% who are predominantly older, who don't want to change their ways, who have no incentive, who are tied to union contracts that tell them they're only going to get a raise if the SAT scores go up, so there's no justification for doing anything but teaching SAT preparation. That 6% will over the next 10 years. The period of time it's going to take to really bring all these platforms into the schools in an affordable way.
Thank you very much. I appreciate those comments. I believe Mr. Sawyer is next on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be able largely to pass. The question that I had planned to ask of our panel is precisely the question that you brought to them. Let me just make a couple of observations before I have to leave. And that is that we talk a great deal about learning being as much a part of the workplace as production or service itself in the immediate future, and yet the one place where we do less of that than any place else is among teachers themselves. We talk about teacher training, but we don't talk about the continuous professional development during a time of change. I think that's enormously important. Mr. Joseph touched on a phenomenon that has been more or less smooth, that 6% turnover per year, but we are reaching a point right now where there is going to be a demographic phenomenon that parallels the baby boom in the retirement of teachers. And that will mean two things. Number one, there will be large numbers of people coming in right now and for the remainder of this century, and we will also rapidly lose the people needed to mentor them in conventional forms of teaching and learning in order to make an adaptation. Third, the whole question of modeling learning is perhaps the single most critical lesson that I took away from the last panel. I'm not sure that it does a lot of good to suggest that we ought to ask school boards to go out and hire teachers who think like children, however important that may be, but rather that we build curricula and teacher training systems that teach teachers how to model learning. And that's a more complex task. I'm not sure it's something that we do very well yet, but it is really part of the challenge for the future. If anybody'd like to comment on that, I'd be willing to hear it, but I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you. Very much appreciate that. Are there any comments, Mr. Mendenhall?
I'd like to comment on that. This concept of modeling learning in the broadest, freest concept is simply, there's technology in the classroom, they're working on projects, teachers are working on this.
Right.
We find that unless that's structured in a meaningful way. I mean, the great teachers will do it and will
that's
model
precisely
it,
what I'm
and they'll
talking
do it
about.
whether or not there's technology in the classroom. All of the other teachers need some structure around that, and I think the reformed classroom of technology is a classroom that focuses not on the teacher delivering content like some predetermined body of knowledge which everyone must know, but rather teaching the students to go acquire information, to use information, where to find information. In the process of doing that, they're modeling the process of acquiring, using, finding information, because the information you find this year is different than the information you found last year with your class. The textbook is no longer static. The content is no longer static. You're finding information and applying it to new situations. And while it's challenging for teachers, exactly the challenge that makes it more invigorating and more interesting to them, as opposed to the frustration that many of the traditional teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Dr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. I've been very interested in the testimony. I was privileged to spend 24 years of my life in the classroom, and so I've been sitting here thinking of all of those experiences and the role of technology. The technology that you've been talking about, of course, is indispensable in the business world. If it's indispensable there, it needs to be indispensable in the classroom. The technology is moving into the classroom, certainly not rapidly enough and not in enough classrooms, but it's there in a number of classrooms. This technology ought to make learning easier. The students ought to know more. They ought to learn faster as a result of it. But as you look at the achievement scores year by year, and I don't know if they bottomed out yet. I've not been watching them as closely the last couple of years as previously, but for, what, 30 years roughly? Every year we gave quantitative tests to assess how we were doing in education, in spite of spending more money on education. The scores of students were lower each year pretty much than they were the year before. Clearly, throwing money at education did not improve the scores. Technology ought to improve the scores, and I heard one of you say that that there is study after study that shows that just moving computers into the classroom has not improved the scores of students who are in those classrooms. Certainly we need to move this technology in, because it's what they're going to be dealing with when they get out of the classroom and into the workplace. But if the technology is not helping to improve the scores, and I heard, you know, we're using two words, training and education. It's training to know how to use this equipment. Hopefully, having been trained to use the equipment, you then can use it to educate. What's happening that in education, that the increased money that we've been throwing at education, that the movement of technology into the classroom, and it's not moving fast enough, but there is a meaningful amount of it there. Why haven't educational achievement scores gone up, and what else do we need to do?
I'll take a crack. First, I believe SAT scores peaked in 1969 and went down consecutively every year until maybe the last 1 or 2 years it blipped up a little bit. Concurrently, the same period of time, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, but the quality of people who've gone into teaching has continued to come from the bottom 20% of those who graduate from college. Now, this statistic was actually, and I shook my head when I first heard it, because when I mentioned I testified here in '91, and it was Al Shanker, who was sitting next to me at the time, who made the case that we need to get more technology in the classroom, because he had just seen statistics of those students who just graduated high school in 1991 saying 5 years from now, from those who graduate college, from the bottom 20% of those graduates, we'll be putting our next math and science teachers into the classroom. So we need the technology to supplement what they don't know. And so that's been a very big part of the equation, too, coupled with the fact that young people more and more find school not a very relevant place in the kind of world that they live in. And in the previous panel, people used the words like boredom or, whatever, but to go in and be told that what you're here for is basically to sit quietly for the next 12 years while we prepare you to take a standardized test that may or may not have anything to do with the future of your life is something they figure out early enough that's, I don't know why I'm doing this. It makes no sense to me.
Anyone else wish to comment?
I just wanted to say that I've seen study after study that has shown where teachers have been trained and that technology is used intensively in the classroom. I think when teacher training doesn't happen, then nothing happens.
To just amplify a little bit on that, you've hit sort of my pet peeve or project. The fact of the matter is that in most cases, and by the way, we do have a lot of technology in schools. I think we're now with 1 computer for every 9 children, and I suspect when we get to 1 for every 5 children, we'll be at about the right level in terms of making meaningful impact in the classroom. The difficulty is that most of those computers went in on technology plans that said, we want to get a computer for every 5 children, not we want to improve learning, or we want to improve scores, or we're going to try to improve math in 1st grade or reading in 3rd grade. And they got what they planned. They got exactly what they expected, which was a computer for every 5 children. Similarly, we want to train our teachers to be comfortable with computers, not we want to train them to use them effectively in the classroom. Most of the computers today are either being used in front of the classroom as a presentation device in place of an overhead projector or a film strip, or they're down the hall in a lab being used either for computer literacy, to teach kids about computers, as opposed to using computers to teach other things, or they're in the corner of the classroom being used largely for games at recess and lunchtime and before and after school, either as a reward for being good or as remedial instruction for those who need additional help. They have not, by and large, been integrated into the classroom, changed teaching, nor have they been focused on the applications which would make a fundamental difference in learning. But as Mr. McCracken said, where they have been, and I've been selling technology to schools for 20 years, where it's been implemented by a school whose focus was we're going to use technology to impact scores, we have gotten, as I said earlier, about a 20 to 30% improvement for 3 to 4% of the school budget. Now that's on standardized test scores, and they're not a perfect measure of learning, but they're the best measure we have today. I suspect if we had better measures, we might find greater increases in learning as opposed to smaller increases in learning. So we know it does work. We also know it's not working in most cases. And I think we propagate that by talking and funding infrastructure, by talking about computer ratios in schools, by talking about wiring buildings, as opposed to talking about money for curriculum software, money for applications in the classroom, and money for teacher training. Where we do that, we get good results.
Thank you all. And
mentioned that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bartlett, it expired.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
I need to apologize that I can't stay longer. Thank you very much.
In the previous, with the previous panel, Chairman Walker announced that he would cut it off at a certain point, but those who hadn't asked questions would have preference. During the remaining time, the last person on that list is Ms. Morella, if you have any questions. And I think it...
I shall be mercifully brief, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate the kind of expertise that you've given from the industry point of view with regard to the need for educating teachers. I think the next panel is going to be shedding some light on that too, as being critical. I've also noted some newspaper articles. I represent Montgomery County, Maryland, which is pretty advanced in terms of, I think, in terms of use of technology. And some of the articles have been focusing on the fact that the students have taken it within their own hands to do more, because they know more sometimes than the authorities in the schools, and they're impatient with regard to waiting. And it points out sort of what you've said, that 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 they recognize that it isn't so much money that's going to make the difference as it is moving ahead. So they have self-help programs where they help each other. In one instance, in one of the schools, they even did some wiring to facilitate getting online. So I think it's a whole new phenomenon where kids are faster than parents are. Despite the fact that the parents are very well educated, very successful and all, I think it's a phenomenon that means that we've got to work harder with regard to teaching, including with parents. One of the elementary schools in my community has a program where they train parents, the kids, the little kids in elementary school. It's almost like an Even Start. It's not called Even Start, but it's like an Even Start program. Will come in and their children about not only what they're learning, but teach them some new things with regard to the technology. So that being said, if you want to comment on that, but frankly what I'm going to ask you is what do you think can be done in terms of forging the appropriate partnerships between business and industry and the educational system, maybe other organizations too? What would you recommend be done in communities to facilitate technology as an educator?
Does anyone wish to respond? Mr. McCracken?
I'd like to just talk about one example that I've been involved in for the last 2 years with an organization I co-chair called Joint Venture Silicon Valley. Our group on education is made up of about 10 business executives and about 10 superintendents of schools and others involved in the educational process, including 2 school teachers, one at the high school level and one at the elementary level. This is the $20 million that came out of business is funding this group, which is then funding projects in education. We found in surveying business in Silicon Valley that business felt that the educational system in Silicon Valley was the #1 detriment to the economic future of the valley, more so than transportation and a lot of the other issues that we face from day to day. So it's actually been quite easy to attract business interest. What we found out of the educational institutions was a sense of apathy, that things can't be changed. Just by doing this together, I think we've already started to turn the apathy around and started to develop some hope for the future. So again, I think it's community action. I think it's bringing people together at the community level from both groups. It took us about a year just to learn the same words, and that the same words develop an environment where the same words had the same meaning. So we actually waited a year to develop a good communications ability between ourselves before we started funding programs.
Who instigated it, Mr. McCracken?
Well, it was instigated by open community hearings about what the priorities were in the valley.
Maybe
Thank you very much.
Could we hear from each of the others quickly? I mean, just.
I would just echo Mr. McCracken's statement there. I think in most communities, you'll find that the business community is, when they are regarded as a stakeholder in the process, is more than willing to participate. And I think coming to the table of the education community, the business community, parents, and so forth on a common agenda is absolutely critically important. And in the research sites that we're working with, we're finding that the business community as well as the school district, when a common agenda is established, is more than willing to collaborate.
Any other quick responses, Mr. Mendenhall?
I think the single most important thing business can do to support change in schools is to insist on results, to set standards, to insist on achievement, to assist in some measurable change. Too often when a school district talks about buying computers, the questions are what's the price and how much will it cost, not what do you expect to accomplish with these machines. And if business will be clear about their requirements and hold schools to high standards and insist on results for money, insist on our own businesses on a return on investment, then we will be able to bring about real change by focusing on the key issue, which is changing learning outcomes.
Mr. Joseph?
Quickly, I agree with the accountability standards too, but also, as I mentioned earlier, now that Mr. Chairman Goodling is here, we have to ramp up the level of the involvement. We have to, instead of picking on developing, while you have community by community programs, it has to be in the context of a bigger game plan, which is why the Pennsylvania example I gave of Penn State working with the state chamber, working with all the state major players, laying out the framework that works statewide and then puts the other groups in place. Now you can accelerate a combined, unified vision that works for everyone in terms of bringing technology into the learning process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Lady, time has expired. The remaining names, just to clarify the list, we have Ms. Johnson next, followed by Mr. Cunningham, Ms. Woolsey, Mr. Faywell. Again, since we want to have, in fairness, allow time. Next panel, I urge everyone to keep their questions and responses brief, but I certainly don't want to cut anyone off. Ms. Johnson, do you have any questions?
Just a brief comment, and I want to ask a question. I want to express the appreciation to the private industry for the support that education has received. Being from Dallas, Texas, where we have a variety of technologies, they have been very, very supportive.
No.
And we would continue to encourage that. Sometimes that's the only way we get introduced to the various technologies is through our private industry, who is willing to furnish technology for a limited period of time or whatever, and that is appreciated, and it really shows a real partnership from private industry to our public, and of course it's been public and private schools. I hope we'll continue, and I'm attempting also to try to encourage our teachers and our leadership in our schools to embrace that even more. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I talked to Del Corning and asked him, what kind of an investment can we really make into the systems? They told me, and I got these figures secondhand, so I don't know if they're accurate or not, but they said about 3% of copper wire becomes obsolescent each year, so we can invest in new fiber optics. Said we have about a 3% increase in facilities in school libraries. So there's about a 6% investment I truly believe that we can make on a federal, state, and private level. My real concern, and you addressed it a little bit in your talk, is what I call the consumables. And we talked a little bit about it during the break, that I can buy a computer today, but in 6 months I may not be able to talk to the same company's computer, either with software or the new systems, from a 486, to a new system or whatever. Then when we have different school districts, some using IBM, some using the Apple, some using the others, how do we tie that together to be able to talk? And I think, first of all, is that our problem is we get only 7% of education dollars out of the federal government. 93% comes from the state. And I think until we change the entire role of what government looks as education, in this member's opinion, we need to change the whole way that this committee views its responsibility to education. I think we can take 7% of the dollars, but we can get more than 23 cents out of each dollar down into the classroom by the research and the development and the high-tech investment. And I think we do more that way than we do the engineering that we try and do as it is today. But at the same time, if we do that too fast, with education being forward funded, I eventually want to take most of education back to the states. But I can't do that right now because I got 4 and I'm going to hurt the very thing I'm trying to correct. My Democratic colleagues in the Republican Party were doing it too fast. But the real question is, how do we solve, other than just leasing the equipment, for a school system to invest in a computer and to software, generating costs because the school system doesn't make any money?
Any volunteers to respond?
I have two quick responses. One is The technologies, we're at the right time from a technology standpoint. The idea of the internet and the World Wide Web that we all read about allows essentially all computers to work together, talk together, and information that's available over the net. That may not be true of computers that were produced 5 or 10 years ago, but certainly it's true today and into the future. And I think that's one of the things that's causing an explosion in interest at the present time. On the consumable side, the McKinsey report I referred to earlier that's coming out in about a month develop a cost to your education of about 4% on an ongoing basis of the budget, total budget every year. Assume that the products...
Is that state and federal?
That's total education spending, community, state, federal. About 4% of that would be the maximum every year. And that included a replenishment of systems, replacing the technology on a periodic basis, generally in less than 5 years.
I might just interject, that's considerably less than the health care costs the school systems pay. Mr. Wright, did you wish to comment?
I would follow up on Mr. McCracken. Really emphasize that our own independent studies would tend to agree with the McKinsey report that about 4 to 5% is what's required if, in all of the components are delivered simultaneously, the right tools, training with the right support. The idea of directing existing dollars becomes more and more a reality. With extensive video networks throughout a school district, fewer bus rolls are needed to participate in event sharing. With access to electronic databases and so forth, schools are going to be less willing to spend $40 per child on a that's delivered brand new and it's 7 years out of date. So we're seeing with the right tools, the right access, and with a continuing improvement in the software and the electronic information for the first time ever, being on the verge of reaching substantial dollars.
Mr. Madden.
First of all, with the general percent of the school budget, does allow for the implementation of technology and and the training to in schools. It assumes a turnover about every 5 years of computers, and too much is made of this computer obsolescence, again because the focus is on the hardware as opposed to the application. If in fact you buy something that teaches math well, frankly the math we've taught hasn't changed in the last 50 years. It will teach math well 5 years from now. It will no longer be the fastest, fanciest computer, but it will be perfectly adequate for the application for which you bought it. In terms of federal funding, while it's only 7%, first of all, today, a disproportionate amount of it compared to the general amount is spent on technology. That is, overall, we spend about 1.3% of the education in this country on technology. Federal spending, 4 to 5% of federal spending today is spent on technology. Where the federal government, I think, can help is to focus even more of its 7% on technology. I think the rest of it fundamentally is supporting the status quo, the existing system that we've poured money into for 20 years without getting additional results. And so the government can take a leadership in focusing that money not just in infrastructure, but in available for applications well to point for other spending in localities.
I agree that if we just eliminate the bureaucracy, instead of the 23 cents, we could more than double that investment into technology.
Mr. Joseph, did you wish to respond?
Just quick to the original question. The interoperability problem is something that can be solved with the right kind of add-ons. There are at least 386s. We can network them together and it will work in a relatively efficient fashion. However, I have to keep in sight of what we're thinking about. The question is how does every school district afford it? Because information is the fuel for century. And we wouldn't have sat around 100 years ago saying, how does every school system afford to have its own electric power plant? Or how does every school system afford to have its own, and City Hall thinking about how to have our own power plant, and our own phone company, and so on, which goes to the plan, community, setting up community digital utilities, if you will, that share in continuously upgrading the technology platform they all share from. That the World Bank is looking to fund in various parts of the world because they have to start with a system that everyone shares in because they just don't have the infrastructure that allows everyone to have the luxury.
Thank you very much. The gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman and Chairman Good recommendation. This has been, thank you for these great. I think we should have a joint committee now working on this. Can first the Democrats go in one direction, the Republicans go in another, and come up with ideas that were effective of each other's. Working on this together, we have to get into the information age. We have to do it in fashion. So I that. I was pleased to hear that good parents don't have to be literate, because that means good members of Congress don't have to be particularly computer literate, because this is a really low-tech place. And I know that when we're sitting here making all these decisions. My daughter, actually, speaking of getting wired, works for Wired magazine. And so, of course, my office is on the internet, and we're soon to be on the web. But our computer system is generations behind what it could be, and it was the most current at the time that I bought it. And it's almost impossible to update it. So what are you working with? I mean, you're working with a Congress that is low-tech, making high-tech decisions. So I'm going to tell you what I think. I don't think we should be the ones that are leading this charge. I truly, and you're the industrial panel here, I believe that business and industry ought to be leading this debate. And I think you ought to be carrying a large part of the responsibility and the burden. I think the federal government should provide incentives. But stakeholders, you have a workforce for the information age. You have to have new workers. You have to have retrained workers. You have more at stake than any other interest group in this country, except that the nation in general should carry the whole issue. So I think it's going to be up to you, and you can respond to this, to educate the rest of the public, to help with, not help with, but lead the communications about how important technology is the future of this country, how absolute it is that we're going to be up technology all the time. People, the taxpayers, so it's going to have to come the people that work with, work for you, your people you're hiring, and I challenge you. We've got equipment, we've got installation and we've got training for the kids. We have to have employment when it's all over with. I think it really rests a lot on industry. So if you'd like to respond to that, I'll listen.
Mr. First word this time.
Local chambers are sort of in a situation these days. A number of the key people from around the country of working with their community for advanced education and training. And one of the people from an unnamed city said, you know, 10 years ago, companies wanted to come to our part of the country. We could just lie to them. We'd say, oh, it's great. We got great schools. We got great churches. We got great communities. It's just wonderful. Come on down. This is a fabulous place. We have the facts on our side or not. He says, we can't do that anymore. He says, because industry knows what our before they even show up here. The global world, and literally this person went through the scenario of he said, we're either going to go to Europe or go to Mexico. Now, in Mexico, we know the labor is going to be a whole bunch. But we prefer being here if you show us that you've got to provide commitment, put in place the schools so that we know after the $40 million factory, it takes 20 years to amortize. People come through your school systems for the next years are going to be qualified to work there. Also rejigger your community so that we can have retraining opportunities as we adapt with and that community did. They won out over Mexico. That's the model we're showing for the country, that you guys at the community level have the forefront of doing things, of leading the charge. Otherwise, that community, there's not going to be any industry.
Wish to respond, Mr. Henry?
I think the support for change in our schools and reform schools, and specifically reform through technology, needs to be at all levels and sectors, from federal government and localities and certain businesses. First of all, in my opinion, from the federal development of applications, we need research on what works, evidence of what works, applications available. If there is a focus on, and if there is for application results, then private will rise to doing the development and creating the application, and providing the teacher training in order to generate results. If the results are valuable, is available for results. We, as IBM, you may know, our Chairman Lou Gerstner and Wisconsin are hosting a government in March for all of the Government Day conference on technology specifically. I think the states have a big role in technology. Millions of dollars every year on developing applications specifically to improve performance in schools. We've given this year over $2 in individual grants to innovative projects use technology to reform educational institutions. I think business can and will step up and play a bigger and bigger role because it is essential to our workforce. But we need support from the federal government, the state government, from parents, of society, that education is a priority and that technology is to implementing.
Thank you. Mr. Wright?
I would echo those. I would add to that just from a practical matter, the figures that have been today about the cost we're talking about doing are daunting. Simply from a practical matter, schools we're going to have to think about how business and the private sector work together. And we're going to think about how best to bring that about, whether are more appropriate in some cases than mandates. The business is on the public school side. But you're right. The agenda for all parties is too great to ignore, and I'm optimistic that collaboration will continue.
Mr. McCracken, do you wish to add anything?
Two quick comments. Workforce. I was walking in the manufacturing area in Silicon Valley, and it struck me that, and I've since studied it, that a third of our very high manufacturing workers are first-generation Americans. And I suspect that one of the reasons for that is that their K-12 education is better and they can handle the statistics and understanding manufacturing activity. Manufacturing in the U.S., but first-generation American, this impact on that. We accept the challenge, but we'd like you with us both at the national level and within your own districts, where I think you can also make a major difference.
Thank you very much. Ladies, time has expired. Make one comment. As chair of the Computer and Information Resources Working Group Committee, you'll have a high-tech Congress shortly, within a year or two, and a very well-trained Congress. Well, not necessarily last. Do you have any questions?
I'm going to save my question for the next panel. I'm going to save my question for the next
Mr. Paywell reserves this time. Mr. Goodling, has no questions for this. Again, for your attendance here and your words. I appreciate them, and the record will encapsulate all your comments as well. To call for the next to come forward, and also mention that Goodling, who is chair of the American Educational Opportunities Committee, which is co-sponsoring this, will chair at this point. It's fairly appropriate that he be the one chairing the educational panel. The panel will consist of Dr. Deborah McGriff, Senior Vice President, the Edison Project, New York, Ms. Lemshaw, Associate Superintendent of the Illinois State Board of Education, Alan Brown, President of Waukegan Public Schools in Illinois. We'll start with you, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Goodling.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, I'm Deborah McGriff, Senior Vice President of the Edison Project, a private company with public districts and charter schools who provide world-class education for all students. I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon about education in the 21st century. I'd like to begin by describing the vision of in the year 2015, and then describe to that 21st century. I'd like each of you to picture an invention that we would call PAL. PAL is a personalized technology that students, teachers, and adults carry with them everywhere. Learners use PAL to plug into the information highway that runs through their They are connected to museums, libraries, community, industry, and government. This connection has a tremendous impact on learning. How might learners use their PAL? A teacher is at home in Boston planning for her students. She could use her PAL to access a national database of exemplary lessons and resources. A youngster learns institution his or her PAL filtering mechanism to access a database that for resources that teachers, parents, and the community appropriate for his or her level. In that community could use the same tool to take and medicine on terms using the imaging retrieval technology. How makes lifelong learning affordable and a full reality anytime, anywhere. No longer would learners rely on what educators call pull-out programs, where learning occurs in classrooms or seminars. The learner is a teacher or a student or an industry or seeking a GED, just would be the norm. New models of teaching would develop. We would go beyond what everyone has described today as teaching by telling model and the learning by listening model education, so that able to reach different students, teach different skills, and achieve multiple goals. Now, how would we accomplish this vision by 2030? We need at least 4 basic principles. 1, we must develop ubiquitous infrastructure. 2, an availability of content and resources. 3, there must be the ability to personalize access, or what marketing people call mass customization. And finally, equality of access to the infrastructure. Let's talk about the first cornerstone. And I agree with many of the previous speakers that this is the easiest to establish. But communities, they will require additional support from the federal government so that communities and school districts and schools whose per pupil is currently below the average will have the ability to access these resources. If that is done, we have the ability to narrow the gap between the have and have-nots. And while letting and connect the wire is the easiest to take, in the is the least important aspect of reforming learning through technology. More important than infrastructure is making sure that something different and meaningful happens with capital investment. The question that we must continue to ask ourselves is what all is the purpose of all technology. We must look beyond infrastructure to the educational goals and the human and organizational issues involved in developing new teaching and learning. We have considerable time today to talk about the need for additional teacher professional development, and I'd like to say a little about that as well. Every teacher education program must require teachers to master not basic literacy, but methodologies of teaching with technology. In the practice of computer teaching teachers and encourage computer using teachers with diverse technologies to support their practice. Ongoing re-education has been emphasized today. That's why in the Edison program, teachers are given 2 hours every day to plan their professional activities. There was expressed a need to add some structure to this re-education development. And our expectations that the first year, teachers become comfortable with the technology. During the second year, they develop a level of confidence. By the third year, they move to a level of creativity. But equally as the task of preparing is the task of preparing communities. Communities must define their education and place technology in that context. And the challenge technology grants we consider examples of communities working together to implement technology. My final recommendation is to another feature in schools and a computer for students' home that through local and wide area networks to the school and teachers. We believe homes, computers, learning are another critical element of equity, and believe that that must be included in any transformation of technology in the 21st century.
Okay.
Thank you. It's a distinct honor to you and talk about this issue, which is really for the economic growth of this nation. we heard some speakers in the past about the future, and I'd like to share my views on that. One of the things that I think we're seeing is recognition that significant change in the society as a whole, that in that we're looking at a global television network that lives in the world. We're looking at a global economy. We're looking